All right. So we're going to talk about the real kind of nitty gritty stuff of oyster gardening. This will be some of the most helpful stuff, hopefully, that you guys hear about. And we'll get right into it. Oh, quick update. Most of the gardens have floated. So if anybody's in town and wants to get to their cage, it should be floating, with one caveat, and that is that if anybody has an older cage and you lost both of your floats, those are still on the bottom. And unfortunately, we're going to have to change you into the new bag system. The Kellys just did it. It's not too bad, right?
All I want to say is that looks like a cage graveyard.
Yeah, the cages got beat up over the winter. Generally, they've been getting beaten up from day one. So more on that later. So your stuff should not look like this, and that's kind of the ultimate goal, right? This is an actual cage from Napeague Harbor from last summer. I took these pictures in September. So, I mean, the one on the left, you can barely even see there's a cage there. It's covered in seaweed. Some of the stuff I don't even talk about because it really takes a long time for this seaweed. The predominant seaweed there is the green one. It's called codium, also known as what? Anybody? Sputnik grass. Anybody's heard the term Sputnik grass? So it really takes a long time for that stuff to become established. So I'm assuming that this cage was not touched all summer. So this is what we do not want things to look like, as an example. So we're going to get right into the fouling organisms. And a lot of you guys that have been around have seen all these things. So the first one there is a stalk tunicate. That one too takes a long time to show up. And those really adhere to your bag. So basically, for those that are new, anybody that has a garden or even your lawn, if you leave it fallow, if you kind of just leave it alone, weeds are going to overtake everything. And that's basically the same thing that happens in the harbors with our bags and our cages. If you just leave them and don't touch them and don't clean them, then they're going to be covered in all this other quote unquote weed. So another one is barnacles. Everybody knows what barnacles look like. Those are, I mean, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but the barnacles aren't a common fouling organism for us, partly because they set early. The barnacles are actually setting now.
A lot of our oysters have barnacles on them.
All right, well, I stand corrected. So
we have a lot on the cage, but
on the cage, yeah. So yeah.
Floats too.
Yeah.
The power washer works great to get them off.
Yeah. So I'll get to that. So barnacles will set on the floats because the floats rarely come out of the water. But if you're on top of your bags and your oysters, you might not see them on the oysters themselves, but sometimes they do set and grow. They grow quick. Another one is the sea squirt. I think everybody's familiar with this one. It literally squirts. It's also known as a sea grape. This one shows up kind of later on in the summer. And last year they were really bad. They were bad everywhere. So like a lot of things, these things have their cycles, and we'll have bad seasons and good seasons. I did not mean to do that. Okay. Next one is these colonial tunicates. Does anybody know how to move this? There we go. So colonial tunicates, those two pictures on the bottom, and those were what was all over that previous bag. This on the right-hand picture, that kind of whitish, yellowish stuff, that's all colonial tunicates, and that's a very common fouling organism. So that's very common that you might see. Usually they set on your bags. They can actually set on the oysters. Pretty easy to remove. Those come off easily with a brush. Power washer, of course. Anybody know how to move this? Do I dare? All right. Next one is slipper shell. This definitely you'll see on your floats. Sometimes you see them on the oysters, but again, if you're on top of keeping things clean, you might not see them. But those are common all over the place. You see their shells on the bottom, see their shells on the beach, and if they get big, they're actually good eating.
What do they do?
They just, so yeah, what do they do? A lot of the stuff competes for the same food, just like weeds in your garden. So they're competing for the same food. They're gonna obstruct the growth of your oysters. Otherwise, they're just, I mean, barnacles can cut you, obviously.
Yeah.
Sea squirts are just heavy. Like if you get a really foul cage, like cage that I showed originally, I think probably weighed 200 pounds, just because all that extra stuff on there is mostly water weight.
Do they go into the oyster?
No, they don't go into the oyster. They'll usually set on the oyster shell or your floats. But again, you're gonna want to scrape them off if they set. They're competing for the same food. So for the same reason you weed your garden, you're gonna want to keep all this stuff out so that your oysters grow as ideally as possible. The other thing there is a jingle shell, another common shell for anybody who walks the beach. You've seen these shells around. Those will set on your oysters too, set on the floats. So these are just, again, all competing for the same food. So we don't often see this. In a way, it'd be great to see that picture on the top right, other oysters setting on your oysters, because that would mean we have a vibrant recruitment level of oysters spawning and going through their larval cycle, which you guys have all learned about, and then setting on your oysters. But we don't commonly see this, which is, in a way it's too bad, but at the same time, you don't want your beautiful raw bar oyster to have all this oyster overset on it. We call it overset, and it could happen with mussels. Technically, I guess you could call slipper shell and jingle shell setting on your oysters as overset, but you might, and if anybody does find little oysters setting on your shell, let me know, because it's a great thing to know. But it's also easily confused with, and a lot of you veterans know we have double or triple oysters, right? So sometimes in the hatchery, two oysters will set on the same piece of culch and they'll grow, but that's not a new natural set. That's something that happened in the nursery. So we can try and just kind of tell the difference. Boring sponge. This is one that we all have to deal with. And this is what it looks like on a dry shell. This is what it'll look like. You guys have probably all seen it, right? You guys have all seen it? I don't know if you guys are going to see it on the screen, but basically it's a type of sponge that sets on the shell and it ends up boring these little tiny holes in the shell. And when you go to shuck the oyster, it just crumbles on you. So it's doesn't necessarily affect the oyster, although if it gets really, really bad, it could kill the oyster. Like this boring sponge in this picture could have killed that oyster, but it's more of a inconvenience for us when we're shucking and the thing crumbles on us, and then you get shell crumbles in your oyster. It's just a real hassle. So I'm going to talk about how to deal with all this stuff coming up. And then the next one is mud blister worm. This is also very common. Any of you guys seen the mudworm in your oysters? Okay, good. If you haven't seen it, that's great. So basically it's a worm, and that's in the bottom right hand corner of the picture there. It burrows into the shell from the outside, and once it enters the body cavity of the oyster, it creates the oyster then puts a scar over it, which ends up being kind of like a blister. And again, when you go to shuck the oyster, your knife might chip that blister open.
So we
You have a little bit of muddy
timed
water in your oyster,
Oh,
which makes
man,
it
come on.
pretty unpalatable. Could everybody please mute yourself? So the mud blister worm too, it won't kill the oyster unless it gets really, really bad, but it's more of a palatability issue. All right. So those are the most common fouling organisms that we're going to see. So I'm going to try and move this. Pain in the butt, this thing. All right. So what do? Basically, keep everything clean. Every 2 to 3 weeks is kind of the magic time frame. You clean your gear, you can take a little scrub brush like this. You can take a pressure washer, which is probably the best method. We do have folks at our other gardens that use a battery powered pressure washer. You can just suck the salt water through it. Pressure, if you get them when they're relatively fresh and when all the fouling is wet, a light duty pressure washer takes all this stuff off. So you don't want your bag looking like the picture that I showed. You want them looking more like this, like a nice, clean, crystal clean bag. All right. Another thing we can do is air dry. You can see in the pictures here where the cages and bags are flipped upside down. So the float is on the bottom and the bag that holds your oysters is up out of the water column. You can do that once a week if you want. That'll make a huge difference. You might never see boring sponge. You might never see blister worm. You won't see a lot of the other fouling organisms that were on that previous slide if you can just manage to air dry like once a week. And that might even be all you can do, all you need to do. Otherwise, like it says there, you can brush. Another option is brine dipping. Does any of the veterans see anything different about that?
The time, it used to be
Yeah, I've done it.
brief. 15 minutes.
I recently learned that somebody brine dips their oysters for 15 minutes.
We used to do 5.
We've been doing 5-minute brine dips. So brine dip, for those that don't know, is just a super saturated salt solution. We just take a 40-pound bag of salt, dump it into a barrel, mix it up so it's just super saturated. The salt doesn't dissolve anymore. It's 30% salt as opposed to seawater, which is 3% salt. So it's 10 times the salt level. We dip our oysters in that dip. For now, I recently learned we can do 15 minutes. And you shouldn't see any of that stuff. None of the boring sponge, none of the blister worm. Yeah.
The brine oftentimes looks so dirty and disgusting. So that doesn't affect it. That really is still.
No, it does get. So Janet makes a good point. The brine dip gets disgusting because basically what happens. What's that? Yeah. What happens when the brine dip is used is organic matter ends up in the mix and it dies off and the mix just gets a little stinky. So we try to refresh it a couple times during the summer. So basically how that works is we set out a brine dip barrel at all the sites. And last year, I think we left it there all summer, right? Yeah, so we'll probably just leave them there all summer. So again, this is something you can do. You don't have to do it every maintenance session, but maybe 2 or 3 times a season. And it should keep your oysters free of boring sponge and blister worm.
Shouldn't you rinse your bags before you put them
Yeah.
in brine too? But people I don't think do that. And that's why.
Yeah. So another good point Janet made is that try not to dip a disgusting bag into the brine dip. Just dip your disgusting oysters. No, just dip your oysters into the brine dip. So you might need to take your oysters out of your bag and put them into a clean bag and dip that clean bag into the brine dip instead of dipping your really dirty bag in the brine dip, because all that stuff is just going to slough off and make for a really stinky brine dip.
But we shouldn't roll before the salt solution.
The guy that told me 15 minutes said he tumbles before he brines, but I think it's best not to. Yeah.
Barley, he must have very healthy oysters, I think. That people I've had experience where people brine dip and they kill most of the oysters. And because people, if you're not high, if your oysters are, the mud blister worm is, in my experience, is almost in everybody's oysters that I've seen. And if there's too many of them in there, your oyster is weak. If you ever open one with a lot of mud blister worm, it's atrophied. It's not healthy. And it depends on how healthy your oysters are, really, is how far you can brine dip, I think, if you even want to do that. Air drying is a must. Totally a must. But brine dipping, I think you have to take a look at your oysters first before you try and do that. You know, a lot of that. Just what
Yeah,
I'm
yeah, that's a
okay.
good point. I mean, maybe we'll do a little trial here at the nursery with the, the brine dip timing, because when I originally learned about brine dipping, the guy said 5 minutes, because every additional minute is gonna kill 10% of your oysters. So that's why I've been sticking with that 5 minute time limit. But yeah, like you said, air drying. If you air dry once a week or even every 2 weeks, you might not have to brine dip at all. Did somebody ask a question?
I'd like to know what you mean by air drying.
The flipping of the cage. You guys have
You
done.
know, if you go from, you flip the cage over,
Yeah, you guys have done that
for how long though?
That we have-
overnight. Yeah. So air drying, for those that want to air dry, for those folks that haven't done it before or getting into it, you can flip your cage over. So let's assume it's summertime, it's hot out. You flip your cage over in the evening so that the floats are on the bottom, just like this bottom picture. The bag is up out of the water column. And you leave it overnight. You can leave it overnight and then come back the next morning and flip it. Vicky does that all the time, right?
Right. I do it all the time. I do it 7 o'clock at night when it's low tide, and then 7 o'clock in the morning again. So it works out perfect.
Yeah. So you hit 2 low tides.
So the predators are out at night? That's why you turn it over?
No, you turn it over. Is he joking with me? I can't tell. Is this guy joking with me?
Only a little.
Oh,
Barley, can I
yeah.
just I just like to mention that I've been in the program since the very beginning. I'm in 3 Mile Harbor. I had a lot of mud blister worm. Last summer I've air dried probably every 2 weeks, if no more than every 2 weeks. Maybe one more than every 2 weeks. And the oysters got so much more healthy. I had to power wash my cage once that summer, this last summer. So I got to tell you, air drying totally, for anybody who is not in 3 Mile Harbor, air dry those bags and you will not have to worry about big things growing all over them.
Yeah. I think air drying is key and it's easy. All you gotta do is wade out there and flip it over and then wade back out and flip it back every 2 weeks.
You have to
Everybody
come
do that?
back the next day too. That's a problem.
Can you power wash oysters? Is it safe or not for the oyster?
Yes. Can you power wash the oyster was a question, and the answer is yes.
So you bring this bag in and
Yeah, you can bring the whole bag in, but again, the only location we have the pressure washer is here at the nursery. But we do have the battery powered ones, right, Chris? Did those work or not?
Yes. I'm concerned about like I think one battery lasts for like, 3 bags. So,
Oh,
and I think it's going to have to be for the floating bag systems because the cages, have the exchange possibility of the bags.
right.
Where, and we just can't exchange. I'm sure you're going to get to this in a few minutes, but you can't, we're not going to exchange the floating bags every 3 weeks, right?
Gotta clean them. Yeah.
So they have to be, yeah. So, I don't know how many power washers we haven't decided how many power washers we're going to have, and then how many batteries per power washer. And, uh, if we have enough gear, I mean, we should be able to make it work well, but I don't know if we have all that gear yet.
Not yet, but I mean, in an ideal world, everybody would just air dry, right?
Yes.
It's not gonna happen. Cause you saw that cage on the first slide. Didn't get
Yes.
all summer. But yeah, the answer to the original question is you can bring this bag in, lay it on the bench or the deck and power wash the oysters right inside the bag. Preferably when they're a little larger. Figure when they're at least 2 inches or larger. You can power wash everything right in the bag. You can also, so again, let's talk about tumbling. A lot of people tumble their oysters. Some people roll each individual oyster. And what that does for the new folks is it chips off the new growth. and makes the oyster develop a deeper cup, which gives you more meat, basically. So there are many ways to achieve this. You can either do the individual oyster roll, which some people do, or you can take this bag and even while it's in the water, just shake it back and forth for like 30 seconds or so. And that'll, the oysters are gonna bend together, they're gonna rub around along the mesh, and a lot of that new growth will chip off. And we also have a couple of hand tumblers. So there's different ways to do it. That also helps to keep the oysters clean, because that'll chip off things like barnacles and young, those fouling organisms when they just begin to set, and they're a little bit more sensitive. So, any other questions on that slide? That's really the big one.
I have a question about with the air drying the cages. Is the sun a consideration? Say you're not able to get to it at 7, if you need to go earlier, you want to do it in the evening, right? It shouldn't be left out during the peak heat of the day.
Yeah. So the reason why we do it at night is so that they don't get baked by the sun. And I'll talk about that more later, but we don't, especially if there's a chance you're going to be eating them within the next couple of weeks, you don't want them baking in the sun, because the bacteria will proliferate inside the oyster. Then it could possibly make you sick. So the idea is to do it at night when it's a little cooler, and they're not going to bake in the sun and allow that bacteria to proliferate. And on the other hand, the sun is also really good at killing the fouling. But if you're sure you're not going to eat your oysters for 3-4 weeks, then sure, you can leave the whole thing out in the sun for a few hours or even a day, and then flip it. But just be very careful about eating oysters that had heated up in the sun. And I'll talk about that in a bit. Does that answer?
Barley, may I make a comment on that?
Yeah.
I think you mentioned before that when an oyster is dormant, you can take it out of the water for months, and they can be out of the water. And they're very resilient. So air drying in the spring or the fall, you could leave it for several days probably if you forgot or something like that. So it's not like even in the middle of the summer, if you leave it overnight and you come, oh, I forgot, I can't make it till 10 a.m. or something like that. Most likely, if they're healthy, they're going to make it, right? I know you want to be precautionary, but people sometimes get very concerned about taking them out of the water for a few minutes. So, I think it's, I just wanted to make the point that they're very resilient animals, and they can take that time out of the water.
Yeah, all true, definitely. All right, next slide. Okay, so other stuff you might see in and around your oyster gear are oyster toadfish. I don't know if anybody's seen one of those around here. Anybody?
I haven't seen one in years and years.
I see them out in Baconics, but I don't think we'll see one in here. But if you do, they're so ugly, they're beautiful. One of those so ugly, they're beautiful kind of things. What's going on here? Oh, skeleton shrimp. Which skeleton shrimp you might not see a lot of, because they really rely on seaweed to hang out. We saw some when we were pulling the cages and bags up. They're a tiny, like that skeleton shrimp in that picture is less than an inch long. Looks like something right out of Alien. Really crazy looking shrimp. Grass shrimp, you'll see those all the time. That's our local shrimp. Unfortunately, they don't get much bigger than an inch and a half or so. Otherwise, they'd be really great eating.
They predators?
No, they're all, if anything, they're cleaners. And so this is we often tout how oyster gardening or oyster farming creates habitat, and this is why, because all these things are hanging out in your gear, hanging out in your cage, hanging out under your bag, because otherwise our bays are just virtually bare and bottom. There's really no cover. So once we provide this cover with the bag or the cage, these guys really flock to it like within days. So blackfish, that one in the middle, those are very common nursery fish that you'll find in your bags. Not necessarily in your bags unless you use a larger mesh bag, but they'll be swimming around in your gear. Silver sides, you'll see those. Porgy and scut babies, maybe not so often. Striped bass, probably swim around. They probably swim around our gardens at night, picking off things like grass shrimp. Who knows? Banded rudderfish. Actually, I haven't seen a banded rudderfish in a while. That's a tropical that comes up here. We used to see them in Napeague all the time, but it's a cool looking little fish you might see swimming around the gardens. Black sea bass. See those babies in our garden gear all the time. So just in case you see this stuff, it's there because you're gardening. So you're providing habitat. Now on to the predators. We've got cow-nosed ray, which is not going to affect you guys because all your oysters are in bags, so they're protected from predators. That's part of the reason they're in the bags. It protects them from predators, makes it a lot easier for us to work on. The crab in the middle there is the Asian shore crab. That's a relatively small crab that's can only really prey on seed. But again, since your gear is contained, the other crabs is the green crab on the bottom. Of course, the blue claw crab on the top left is one of the main oyster predators. But again, all your stuff is contained. It's in bags. You shouldn't see any of this stuff inside your bags. Calico crab is the one in the middle on the left. Spider crab on the bottom left. One that you might see in the bags is the one that's being held by the thumb there, the black-fingered mud crab. But those don't get much bigger than that, so you don't have to worry about finding those in your bag because unless you have really, really small seed, they're not going to do any harm. Again, they're using your gear as habitat. The birds, of course, the gulls and the oyster catchers. Top right is conch, which again, they're not going to get inside your bags, but they are a natural predator of clams and that's not conch, that's moon snail, sorry. That's a moon snail, which can drill a hole in your shells. But again, you don't often see those in your bags. The oyster drill is a potential predator. That's the one in the middle on the right. Anybody ever seen an oyster drill in there? Some people's heads are nodding. So the oyster drill is a little tiny snail. It's kind of camouflaged in this picture, but it's the snail that's on this oyster in the middle. And those actually drill a hole through the shell, hence the name oyster drill. And then they suck the meats out of the oyster. The moon snail on the top right, that also drills a hole, but that hole is countersunk. So the drill hole, the oyster drill hole is just a straight, just imagine taking a 1/16 of an inch drill bit and drilling it straight through your shell. It's a straight hole, you'll see it. The moon snail shell hole is about the same size, but it's got, what's another word to describe it? Beveled edge, countersunk or beveled edge. The oyster drill can do a lot of damage, but again, if you're on top of things and you're looking after your bags every 3 weeks or so, if you see these, you gotta be savage and toss them up on the dry land so they die off. And the egg cases are also in this picture. They're those kind of brownish stalk-looking things. Anybody seen egg cases on there? Okay, so you might see egg cases on your oysters. Scrape those off. We don't want these things to proliferate in our gardens because they will do damage. What else? Oh, that's just a list. All right. So really the only one here you need to worry about is the oyster drill.
About the one at the bottom, we have to worry about those.
Which one? Oh, the humans. Yeah. Actually, I just heard a story. One of the oyster gardeners in the lake. David, don't freak out. This is not going to happen to you. But one of the oyster gardeners in the lake went to his bags, and the bags were empty. So Poaching is possibly an issue. We've had some oysters go mysteriously missing, but I think it's a combination of not closing the bags up properly and poaching. So it's a potential problem. So we need to just look out, make sure our bags are closed up. Hopefully there's enough traffic at the gardens that nobody's in there poaching stuff, but it is a potential problem.
Leona has that one.
Yeah, that one.
Savona.
Yeah. It happened here at 3 Mile one summer. It seemed to be a bit of a plague. But there's so many oysters on the bottom from our seeding programs that I don't know why anybody would go through that effort, but who knows?
Do you have any cameras? Any cameras?
There's cameras here
Yeah,
at
right.
3 Mile,
Right.
but they're constantly running, so you have to know when it happened,
Right.
know which camera to look at. So this picture I love, it's a couple of oysters getting revenge on a blue claw crab. You can see how they set right on the crab shell, right by its eyes there. It grew a lot. This has got to be somewhere down south where they set in June, and then this is
Texas.
huh?
You got access Texas.
Yeah, Texas could be
It's Chris.
most likely. Tangier Island, Virginia. Who knows?
Eastern Shore.
It's definitely down south. Because those oysters are huge and that crab hasn't even molted yet. Luckily, that crab will molt but yeah, the chances of that are just so, that's a 1 in a billion to have 2 oysters set.
Those oysters grow really fast down there, like, that could be what, 6 months?
Yeah, that's what I think. That's like
Wouldn't be
one,
much older than that.
one long
The
season.
crab's gonna molt at a certain
yeah, I think it's just,
point. Although if you can't see where it's going, you might not be eating that much.
it's so crazy. That's a 1 in a billion chance right there.
And one on each claw.
Yeah. Nuts. All right, is any questions on that stuff before we get into harmful algae? All right. Everybody's heard about the harmful algae. Just gonna go through the few of them, different types. There's the brown tide, which luckily we haven't seen around here. This is the one that swept through the area in the 80s. And it's the reason that the shellfish hatchery exists, because it really wiped out most of the shellfish on the whole East Coast. This one is only harmful to fish and grasses. It doesn't affect us. The rust tide is an annual tide, and the picture on the right is a picture of a rust tide. So you can see it's kind of patchy. It's not like a perfect cover of rust. But like I said, it's annual. It can be lethal to fish and shellfish, but at the same time, there's not a whole lot we can do about it because it is patchy and it kind of moves with the current, moves with the tides. So it's just good to be aware of when it's around. And I'll talk about how to be aware of when these things are around and know which one is which and which ones will affect us and which ones affect our shellfish. So these are the 2 main ones that really affect shellfish and don't affect our ability to harvest them. The brown tide and the rust tide. So these are the ones that the harmful algae that affect humans. The red tide, it looks very much like rust. And this one causes a saxitoxin. It has a saxitoxin that causes paralytic shellfish poisoning, which is basically causes a numbness of the lips, and it's really a kind of an allergic reaction. Mahogany tide, again, very similar color. Can cause diuretic shellfish poisoning. You can imagine the symptoms of that one. Domoic acid from Pseudonychia, which is the one in the one pictured in the bottom right. This is so Pseudonychia is the actual algae, which produces an acid called domoic acid, which can cause amnesic shellfish poisoning. And again, that one, amnesic, it actually causes you to lose your memory. You jump
Human can lose
into
their memory.
huh?
Human can lose their memory?
Yeah, from eating shellfish that have
Yes.
Pseudonychia.
Okay.
What was that? Yeah, okay.
Dad, I think you might have that one.
What's that?
said dad, I think you might have that one.
Mom's here. I get that one all the time. So again, the only way to know what's what is obvious. There's a chance you can see it. You know, the rust tide is pretty obvious when it's here. But listen to the local news, check in with your trustees, and sign up for the DEC email notifications. And as soon as anything closed down, obviously, if things close down, I'll let you know too. But if you go to the DEC website, you can sign up for email notifications, and you'll get emails whenever this stuff pops up. There's already some shellfish closures in Shinnecock from one of these toxins. I'm not even sure which one it is, but it could be an interesting year because we're very dry, which in a way is good because there's less runoff, less excess nutrients flowing into the waters, but we're also warming up quickly. I was telling last week I was in Peconic. On Friday, the water was 48 degrees. And yesterday it was already 60 degrees. So it's cranking. Here it's a little cooler because we're that much farther east and more tidal. But so this map shows is something that the Stony Brook School of Marine Atmospheric Science produces every year. A little daunting, but it's just they keep track of all these harmful algae blooms. You know, obviously all color coded. As you can see, Great South Bay is pretty much getting an annual brown tide every year. You got the blue ones here are the rust tides. Nope, sorry, that could be hypoxia. Yep. So unfortunately, it's showing a lot of 3 Mile Harbor, which isn't entirely accurate. It's really probably just ahead of the harbor. Where's the one? The rust. Yeah, also rust in 3 Mile Harbor and Northwest area. And so this is produced every year. Dr. Gobler over there at SUNY SOMAS is in charge of all this stuff, but take home message is just to be aware. You know, rest assured that all of our gardens are in certified waters, and the only time they're really going to close is if we get a heavy downpour, which happened once or twice last summer. And for 3 Mile growers, after the fireworks will be shut down, unfortunately. So, and also I think you all know this, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, but you all know that these harmful algae blooms are caused by excess nutrients entering the waterways, which comes from our septic systems and fertilizers. So if we update or clean our septic systems often, obviously growing shellfish, which sequester all these excess nutrients, and you use them for their meats and their shells. They're good for us to eat, and stay informed. It's the best we can do. I think we're going to talk about diseases next. Yeah, so any doctors in the audience know what causes disease. You have a susceptible host, you have the pathogen, and you have the environment. All those things come together, and you have a disease that can affect everything: us, oysters, animals, bird flu, stuff like that. So there's 3 main ones that can affect the oysters. Only one of them really that's going to affect gardeners. So we'll do that one last. You have vibriosis or bacillary necrosis. That is more of a hatchery issue. JOD, ROD is more of a nursery issue, and I'm going to go into more detail on these. And then dermo, which is the one that you guys might see in your gardens. Again, I'll elaborate on all these. So vibriosis is caused by Vibrio. A lot of you have heard what Vibrio is. It's a ubiquitous bacteria. This is the one that we hear about every summer. Somebody swims with an open wound in brackish waters and gets a Vibrio flesh-eating bacteria. Unfortunately, it's also one of the things that can cause people to get sick from eating oysters. And that's where handling your oysters comes in, very important. Like I mentioned before, if oysters are set out in the sun, they have this ubiquitous bacteria in them already, and if they're allowed to warm up, that bacteria proliferates, and it could get to a level that can make people sick. And it's mostly immunocompromised people. So if you're immunocompromised already, you need to be very careful to make sure your oysters are perfectly fresh, which you should do anyway, right? So treat your oysters as the meat that they are. Keep them fresh, keep them on ice, and Vibrio should not be a problem. So like I said, this is a more of a hatchery issue. If we don't keep things perfectly clean, this bacteria can proliferate and wipe out larvae. That's basically what can happen there. So it doesn't affect you guys. JOD, ROD, JOD stands for juvenile oyster disease. And that's what they called it before they knew what caused it. So now we know it's caused by a bacteria called roseovarius oyster disease. And again, this is a ubiquitous bacteria. It affects spat or juvenile oysters up to about 1 inch in size. And the way it shows up is the shell has this brown conculin layer in it, and it also has kind of an underbite or overbite, depending on how you look at it. And I've got this little shell plate here that kind of shows you what they look like. So we suffered from this a few years ago. Our seed here in the nursery got hit with JOD. We lost a whole bunch of seed. So basically what we did was we took the survivors from that episode and kept those as our brood stock and basically created a resistant stock. So all of our oysters now are resistant to the disease. So are yours. So it should no longer be a problem for us. But for anybody who's might be getting into the nursery business, that's a potential problem. So the one that you guys need to worry about, and this is probably the main cause of mortality of large oysters, is this disease. It's a warm water protystin parasite. First showed up here in the early 90s. It's transmitted from oyster to oyster. So if an oyster has the disease, the oyster dies, and these spores, these little black spheres, will drift to the next oyster. That oyster sucks them up, and the parasite proliferates inside that oyster, and it causes peak mortality when oysters are about 2 years old, or coincidentally right around harvest size. So the best thing we can do is really harvest our oysters, eat our oysters, and if you don't, and if they do die, it's probably caused by this disease. This is the most common cause of oysters that die when they're older.
And the
one of the reasons-
vectors are the drills, the traditional drill?
No, the vector is the parasite itself. It's just drifting in the water column, gets into the body cavity of the oyster and gets into the cells.
The drill we talked about
So-
before or not? Oyster drill.
And, the oyster drill is different.
Okay.
So what does that look like? What does a dead oyster that died of this look like? Is there any meat in it, or is it just an open shell with nothing?
Good question. So the only time it's going to look any different than just a dead, empty oyster is if you catch it just after it's died. You might see the meats in the oyster. And if this happens, we could send the oysters off to get tested. But the oyster meats themselves will appear to be in poor condition. So unless you have like a boring sponge or mud blister that could be causing that poor condition, it could be the dermo disease.
So could you open one that had this?
You wouldn't know it.
Or,
I think I have had more than a few, but not tons, but some that are dead and open, but they look like they just gave up, so they haven't been scavenged yet.
It could have been from how big
Yeah,
was it?
they look like they died of, natural
They were
causes.
big?
Yeah, they were on their way to full size.
Yeah.
They weren't little babies.
Could be dermo, it could be, I don't know what else it could be, honestly, because they're pretty much predator free. So, just so you know, it's the most common. And a lot of our stuff, our population does have a certain resistance to it. Because it's here, again, it's another one of those ubiquitous things, it's here, but if it gets to a level, that's another reason why we don't necessarily want longer, hotter summers, milder winters, because the cold winters help the oysters combat against it. So this cold winter we had should help. Brackish water helps, but we don't have that. We're really high salinity water. Fallowing areas could help, but you can imagine that would be a logistical nightmare, right? Moving the garden from one place to another. I don't foresee doing that, so. Just for your knowledge. The bacteria, we're almost done. And we get to eat oysters, those of us that are here anyway. Bacteria that can affect humans, E. coli, everybody knows about this one. This is the one that causes these areas on this map to be closed. It's all measures of E. coli, which is a bacteria related to fecal matter. So the red areas on the map here, which everybody should be familiar with if anybody goes out shell fishing, available on the DEC website. Red areas are closed year round. The darker blue areas are seasonal. As you can see, they're closed from on the top here, top left or top right, closed May 15 through October 15. Down by Shagwong, they're closed May 1 through November 30. So just know what areas are open and when. And again, this is the one that causes the closures after heavy rainfall. The idea that heavy rainfall just washes all this stuff into the water. And it's not necessarily all from humans either. It could come from animals. And that's the case in a lot of cases, like Northwest Creek is a seasonal creek, totally very much undeveloped, but there's so many animals living on that Barcelona area that it washes in. Vibrios, this is the one, we've already touched on this, but this is the one that can affect us. Again, it's a ubiquitous bacteria. It's everywhere. It's in the fish you eat. It's in the clams and the oysters. But as long as we keep our oysters, either keep them in the water, like for instance, when you're coming to work on your oysters and you know you want to take some home, you can either keep them in a bag or basket in the water so they're still filtering and keeping cool, or get them right on ice and get those meats cooling down. Do not let them sit in the sun. And if anybody sees that, please call it out, because we don't want people getting sick from Vibrios. It's the same reason you go food shopping and get your meats to the fridge as soon as possible, because they all have bacteria on them that will proliferate if they're not refrigerated. As simple as that. I don't know what this says. Oh yeah, that's a good point. If you're worried about it, or if you're immunocompromised, you can always cook them, and that kills the bacteria. Just same reason we cook chicken and pork and steak.
They work great on the grill.
Can't eat it, huh?
They work great on the grill.
Oysters?
Yeah.
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 Put them on the grill. They pop open. You cut the meats away, and a little dab of butter. What do you put on yours, George?
Butter or parsley, or both.
Olive oil. Butter and olive oil and pepper. Nice. Any questions on that? Oh, and I think this is almost a lot. So another thing we need to consider as oyster gardeners, we've been hearing more and more about this, is we need to keep the birds off our cages for pretty obvious reasons, right? Birds poop. So those pictures on the left is gear covered in birds, and the picture in the middle is one of our iterations of bird deterrent. It's basically a fishing line running the lengths of the floats. It's enough of a deterrent to keep the birds off. Better for you, better for us, because the DEC does not like birds now. They get yelled at all the time. So if we do, we're going to put these things back on your cages. We do have another method. It's either going to be this, or it's going to be a piece of PVC pipe with a fishing line running through it. But when you do go to your cage or your bag, just make sure you move those out of the way if you're flipping your bag or cage over, so it doesn't get destroyed. But just another thing to consider is, and if anybody comes up with a bright idea to keep birds off the cages, we'll listen. Because I don't like getting those letters from the DEC. All right, that's pretty much it. So post-harvest options, we talked about already. Chill them or keep them in the water, clean them, shuck them. eat them up.
Nice vintage photo.
Don't be scared. Yeah, there's me 80 years ago.
That's your mother.
My mother. Jeez. All right, so what we got coming up is next weekend, not this weekend, but next weekend. Veteran growers can come tend to their oysters, and we encourage new folks to come. Just check out the process, learn what's involved. May 22nd, I'll do a nursery and gear tour here at the nursery. Same time, I think. That's a Thursday, 5 p.m. And then in the middle of June, everybody gets their new seed. All the new folks will start up, and we'll get growing. Water is already, I think today it was like in the mid-50s. So the oysters are starting to feed. So anybody who's already got oysters, I highly encourage you to eat them because they're so good right now. Really awesome. Any questions? Yes.
And clean the barnacles off. The easy way to clean the barnacles off.
The easy way to clean the barnacles off is really with a scraper, a metal.
Okay.
Use the back of a knife or a metal, some sort of metal scraper. Yeah, pressure washer might get them off, but you really need to hit them hard. They're on their feet.
When we had the oyster competition in October, people all had the same species of oyster, right?
Yeah.
What do you think were the factors that made them taste different?
It's a good question. So Steve's basically asking about merroir, which is that notion that oysters that are grown in different areas taste different. And even so, Steve mentioned we have an oyster tasting event in the fall, which we're probably going to do again this fall. So we take oysters from each garden and we blind taste test them, and everybody gets a rating sheet and they get rated, and they do taste different. So that's based on salinity, minerality. That's the bulk of it, right? Salinity and minerality of the water that they're grown in. And they'll taste a little bit different. You can eat an oyster from 3 Mile Harbor here and an oyster from Accabonac, and those with good palates will taste the difference.
They won.
Accabonac won?
Yes.
I think Accabonac won last year. Yeah, so now there's a rivalry. Yeah, so it kind of depends on salinity, minerality, the algae that they're eating. And that does differ. I mean, even just while floating the different gardens, there's different seaweeds growing in different harbors. So there is a difference.
And the tides go differently.
Different tides, yep.
Do you ever test the salinity of the different sites, or it's not worth it?
Yeah, we do with our kelp, because where we're growing, well, only where we're growing kelp, but it's all right around 28, 29, 30. Not a huge difference. Unless you get down to the end of the creeks, then it could get into the teens. But we're so well flushed out here, it's all pretty high. Any other questions from Zoom land?
No, I'd like to make a suggestion for the scraper. A paint scraper we found last year was very helpful
Good idea. Yeah, those are sturdy.
from the
Very
hardware
hardy.
store.
Love your background there. That's pretty cool.
This is the wallpaper from, oh my gosh, isn't it terrible? I just went blank. Our fellow artist in town who's wonderful. He did the, he built what would be a local fisheries.
That's Scott Bluehorn?
Thank you.
Bluehorn?
Scott Bluehorn. Yes, I love his wallpaper, so I bought a whole ream of it.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, any other questions? We're gonna get to eating oysters over here.
Have fun. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks.
Thank you.
See you, Chris Gray.
All right. See you in a couple weeks.
Okie dokie. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Thank you.
All right. A cool out, huh?
You might want to say.
Oh, yeah?
maybe.